Let me congratulate Mr. Sahu and VARINDIA. I was very hesitant to use the expression VARINDIA because it sounds to me like War India. And Mr. Sahu himself used the word battleground, so I guess it's okay to use the word VARINDIA. So let me congratulate VARINDIA for having instituted this award. And congratulations in advance to the awardees and also to those who may not have won awards this year but will do so in the future. Mr. Sahu is very insistent and persistent, and I've been asking a question as to why I have been invited here. I'm happy to receive the bouquet, but beyond that, it's not very obvious to me why I have been invited here. But he persuaded me, and Mr. Sahu also has a tendency to dictate and control. So he not only invited me, but he told me what to speak on. I would much rather have spoken on Digital India, but he told me that I should speak on India's education sector, which of course is relevant, but in a tangential kind of way. I suspect he wanted the minister to talk about Digital India. This is not the forum, nor is it the place to deliver long speeches. So in very, very bulleted fashion, I'm going to highlight what I regard as the major challenges facing the educational sector today. When we say education, when we use the word education, almost everyone here will normally tend to focus on higher education. But higher education is only one bit of it. The education problem begins with school education. Education is a continuum. It spans primary education, secondary education, further up, vocational education, and even higher education. Today, if you look at school enrollment across the country, whatever be the state that we are talking about, we are getting children into schools. That's a laudable achievement. The number of children who are out of school has dropped phenomenally. Do not get me wrong. We have problems with retention. We have problems with dropouts. We have problems with the quality of education. But we are getting children into schools. The education sector is crying out for reform. I also happen to believe that reforms do not happen only when they are supply driven. That is, started by government or governments across the layers, but also when they are demand driven. When I am talking about this enrollment and increase in enrollment in school education, do notice that a large part of it is private expenditure on education, even by poorer households, who are increasingly sending their children not only to government schools, but also to private schools, which tend to be more expensive. Assuming these children who are enrolled remain in the school system, somewhere down the line, once they move up that pipeline, there will be the demand for better education and more education reforms at higher levels also. The second point I I want to make is the moral in sector after sector. Since 1991 in India has been that competition is good. Competition is desirable. If competition is good as a principle, if competition is desirable as a principle, there is nothing particularly special about education why it has to be different. So the issue really is to ensure that competition happens across all parts of that education spectrum without necessarily depriving relatively poor people of access. And it is perfectly possible to direct public expenditure towards scholarships, towards funding the student, towards funding the household, rather than to spend that public expenditure on public provision through public institutions. India is a large country, it is a heterogeneous country, so obviously when I generalize, do not get me wrong, what works in the metros will not necessarily work in the 100,000 villages out of the 600,000 villages which continue to be deprived in various senses so many years after independence. The third point to be made is the need for a regulatory structure, particularly in the case of higher education, but also elsewhere. There are too many regulators. The higher education sector in particular is divided into silos. There is the AICTE, there is the UGC, there is the Bar Council, there is the Medical Council, there is the Nursing Council, and so on and so forth. But the more important point is the content of this regulation. The content of this regulation, because of historical reasons, is still not regulation, but something that is tantamount to licensing. Therefore, the content of regulation needs to move more to dissemination of information. Almost like the kind of information that would be mandatory in a company balance sheet. Students and parents suffer from asymmetry of information in education. Therefore, as a student, as a prospective student, as a prospective parent, I would like to know where that particular educational institution is getting its revenue from. What is its expenditure like? What is its placement record? What are the credentials of the faculty? What is the placement record? What are the publications? What are the citations? All of that stuff. Today, there are huge black holes in all of that information, which is the reason why all the various rankings done by assorted magazines are not really worth the paper they are printed on. So the content of regulation has to move towards dissemination of information, because you cannot have that competition without strong regulation. The next point to note is, as with any competition, you must allow not only free entry, but you must also allow free exit. You cannot have competition, regulated though that may be, with free entry, no exit. Technically today, there is no particular reason why students should commit suicides because they cannot obtain admission in a Delhi University college. I said there should be no reason. Why? Because technically there is excess capacity in higher education. Except no one wants to get admitted into those institutions, they would much rather go off to Australia, New Zealand, the US, elsewhere. It is far better in terms of positive externalities for the country to have the students studying in India, provided the quality of education improves. And I need to quickly mention that particularly for institutions of higher education, we don't do that well in cross-country matches. The last point I want to mention is an issue of what we teach. Today, unfortunately, from the day a child enters kindergarten, the examination system, the syllabus, the teaching, all of that is designed to ensure that the kid does not think. The kid is encouraged to conform to a standard. The kid is encouraged not to be not to take risks. The kid becomes risk averse. Most of you are in the corporate sector. Corporate sector is about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is about taking risks. You cannot encourage people to take risks if you insist on success. To ensure success, you have to encourage failure. To encourage failure, you need to break this template of conformity and standardization and allow kids to think. That's the main reason why students from India eventually flower and prosper and flourish in an education system elsewhere which nurtures thinking. We have plenty of strengths. The demographic dividend, young India has already been mentioned. And if we are going to ensure that India prospers and develops, we need to do not only the roads, water, electricity and transport, we need to do two other things. Both of it are extremely important: health and education. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Deepak, once again for having invited me, and congratulations, VARINDIA. And congratulations again to the awardees. Thank you.